You wake up when your body is ready. No alarm, no schedule, know where you have to be. You sit up, you stretch, and you ask yourself one question. What should I do today? For almost all of human history, that wasn't a hypothetical. That was every single morning for roughly 300,000 years. And the answer looked nothing like the life you're living right now. The average person today spends something like 90,000 hours of their life working. That's about a third of your waking existence handed over to a job. But for the overwhelming majority of human history, jobs didn't exist. No employment, no wages, no boss, no career ladder. So what did people actually do all day? Let's start with the numbers, because they're genuinely strange. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee went to live with the Jew/Huanzi people in the Kalahari, one of the few groups still living largely by hunting and gathering. He tracked what they actually did with their time, and what he found made a lot of people uncomfortable. Adults were spending roughly 2.5 days a week acquiring food, around 17 hours. The rest of the week was theirs. Now an honest note here, because this study got famous and then got picked apart. Critics pointed out that Lee's original count didn't include everything: food processing, tool repair, childcare, walking between camps. Add all that in, and the number climbs. But even the harshest recalculations land somewhere well under a modern 40-hour week. And the same broad pattern keeps showing up wherever anthropologists look. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Ashe in Paraguay, groups in Australia, different continents, different environments, similar answer. Foraging societies generally spend far fewer hours on survival than you spend at work. Sit with that. The lifestyle we describe as brutal and primitive involved less labor than yours. But those are modern groups. How do we know ancient humans lived anything like that? Fair question. And the answer is bones. When archaeologists compare the skeletons of late hunter-gatherers with the skeletons of the early farmers who came after them, the difference is not subtle. The farmers are shorter. Their teeth are full of cavities from grain-heavy diets. Many show signs of nutritional stress and anemia. Their joints and spines show heavy wear from repetitive labor. On average, they died younger. The hunter-gatherers before them were taller, had better teeth, and less joint damage. Their bodies were not the bodies of a species grinding itself to death for food. Whatever they were doing all day, it wasn't more physical labor than farming. It was less. But the best evidence for what they did with all that time is something that shouldn't exist at all if life was a constant struggle to survive: art. In 1994, explorers found Chauvet Cave in southern France. Inside were paintings made around 30,000 years ago. Horses, lions, rhinos, drawn with perspective, with shading, with a sense of movement. These are not crude scratches. This is skilled work. Someone spent hours, possibly days, deep underground by firelight, painting animals on a wall, not for food, not for shelter, for beauty, for meaning, for something to do. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found tiny sea snail shells, around 75,000 years old, each with a small hole deliberately drilled through it. Beads, meant to be strung and worn. The coast was kilometers away. Someone made that trip, carried shells home, and then sat down and carefully drilled holes in them with stone tools. To look good. In a cave in southern Germany, researchers found a flute carved from the wing bone of a vulture around 40,000 years old. 5-finger holes, carefully spaced. Whoever made that understood pitch. They understood music. And they spent real time building an instrument that does nothing for survival whatsoever. And these aren't freak one-offs. From roughly 100,000 years ago onward, sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia fill up with the same stuff. Pigments, beads, carved patterns, tools made far more beautiful than they needed to be. This is what people were doing with the hours they weren't spending on food. They were making things, decorating things, making them beautiful for no practical reason at all. So let's actually walk through a day. You wake up around dawn because the light wakes you. Last night's fire is still smoldering. Someone feeds it. You eat leftovers from yesterday, some meat, maybe nuts and berries gathered the day before. Breakfast is social. People talk. They loosely plan the day. Not because there's a schedule, but because that's what humans do. Mid-morning, a small group might head out to hunt or gather, but here's the part that breaks the movie version. You don't go every day. If the hunt went well 2 days ago and there's still food, you might not leave camp at all. You might spend the morning fixing things instead, resharpening a spear point, weaving, scraping a hide soft enough to wear. And this isn't work in the way you know work. There's no clock, nobody's checking. You do it because skill matters, because being good at things earns you respect in a group of 30 people who all know exactly how good you are at things. If a hunt does happen, it's usually not the dramatic chase you're imagining. Some groups used a technique called persistence hunting, tracking an animal at a steady pace for hours until it overheats and can't continue. We're unusually good at that because we sweat, and most animals cool themselves by panning, which they can't do at full speed, so we outlast them. It's a real strategy, though probably not an everyday one. It might take 3 to 6 hours with the travel. Then the animal is carried back, butchered, and shared out. And by early afternoon, the productive part of the day is basically finished. What happens next is the part modern people find hardest to believe. Nothing, and also everything. People rest, they sit in the shade and talk, they play with the kids, they groom each other, actual physical grooming, picking through hair, which sounds odd until you remember it's one of the oldest bonding behaviors primates have. They make beads, they carve patterns into bone, they nap. The anthropologist James Sussman, who spent years with the Juhuanzi, describes enormous amounts of time simply spent together, talking, joking, being around each other. And that isn't idleness. In a world with no money, no police, no written contracts, your survival is your relationships. If people don't like you, nobody has to share food with you when your luck runs out. So you pour time into those bonds, not because it's productive, because it's the entire safety net. Then the sun goes down, and something genuinely important happens. In 2014, the anthropologist Polly Wiesner published an analysis of conversations recorded among the Jew/Hoanzi, comparing daytime talk to firelight talk. During the day, conversation was practical. Who saw tracks where? Which plants were ready? Complaints about someone not sharing fairly. Ordinary logistics. At night around the fire, that flipped almost completely. The overwhelming majority of nighttime conversation was stories, myths, ancestors, people who lived far away, jokes, songs, the kind of talk that isn't about today at all. Wiesner's argument is that firelight created a space that daylight never could, a few extra hours where nobody could work, nobody had to move, and the only thing left to do was talk about things that don't exist, spirits, the past, the future. What happens when we die? It's a serious case that a huge amount of human culture was born in exactly those hours. And then people slept, though not the way you sleep. There's good historical evidence, especially from Roger E. Kirch's work on pre-industrial Europe, that before artificial lighting, people commonly slept in 2 blocks, a first sleep, then an hour or 2 awake in the dark, then a second sleep. The waking hours in the middle weren't treated as a problem. People talked, thought, prayed, had sex, sat quietly. Whether every ancient society did this, we can't prove, but it does suggest that lying awake in the middle of the night, which you've been taught to call insomnia, might just be a very old human default. So the full picture of a day looks roughly like this: a few hours on food and tools, a very large chunk on talking, teaching, grooming, playing, making things, around 8 hours of sleep, possibly split in 2, and a lot of time simply existing, sitting, watching, doing nothing in particular, with no requirement to justify the day through productivity. Then, about 10,000 years ago, it ended. Humans in the Fertile Crescent started planting seeds and keeping animals. Farming. And farming is a trap, not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well in one specific way. It feeds more people. More people need more food. More food needs more farming. Within a few generations, the population is too large to feed by foraging, and there is no going back. You're locked in. And farming demands enormous labor: plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting, storing, guarding the store from animals and from other people. The skeletons say it plainly. The early farmers worked harder, ate a worse diet, and often died younger than the foragers before them. But populations kept growing anyway, and large populations produced something new: specialists, potters, weavers, builders, then soldiers to protect the surplus, then priests and administrators to organize it, and eventually the idea that your hours belong to somebody else in exchange for resources. That's the job. That's where it came from. Not from human nature, from grain. So here you are. You spend 90,000 hours working. Your ancestors spent a fraction of that. You sleep in one block and call waking at 2 in the morning a disorder. They slept in 2 and used the gap. You spend your life chasing achievements measured by standards that were invented a few thousand years ago, on the assumption that at the end of it, if you win, you get to retire into a life of time, rest, and people you love, which is more or less the life they were already living. Now, to be fair, it wasn't paradise. Child mortality was brutal. An infected cut could kill you. There was no dentist, no surgery, no antibiotics. Anyone telling you it was a lost utopia is selling something. Most of us, given the real choice, would take the modern deal, but it's worth being honest about what the deal actually was. We traded time for security, leisure for numbers, free hours for a system that keeps far more of us alive and keeps almost all of us busy. You make art if you can find the time after work. They made art because time was the one thing they had. If this made you look at your week a little differently, you know what to do. I'm Fred. I'll see you in the next one.